And then he goes, all right, I'll represent you.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. It was like straight up, like, you're not supposed to do it, did it. And then that kind of clicked with something in my head, like, oh, you know, you can kind of decide your own fate. And sometimes people will tell you not to do something, but I think kind of naturally kind of bending the rules, which is something I learned from my parents. You know, sometimes, you know, legally you're not supposed to enter a country, but if you get in, sometimes they just let you stay, you know? So that's what I did. You know, legally I'm not supposed to be here, but hey, they let me stay. So
Knock on a couple of doors, drop off your headshots. You're supposed to mail them. Who uses the mail anyway? I don't know how to mail anything. Welcome to Hyphenated, an Americanish podcast. My name is Adela Kochab, and I'm your Syrian Lebanese, Mexican Canadian, Jewish host. Growing up in the US, I always felt like I never fit into one category. And then I realized that in this melting pot of a country, no one really does. So on this show, I'm really excited to be joined by guests from hyphenated backgrounds to talk about their cultures, family histories, and what it really means to be a little bit Americanish. So welcome to Hyphenated. Welcome to Hyphenated. My name is Adela Kochab, and I'm your Syrian Lebanese, Mexican, Jewish host. And today, I'm really excited to be joined by Mexican-American comedian, writer, and director, Bryan Torresdey. Bryan, how are you doing?
hey, it's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. So when we start this podcast, I always say that when people ask me where I'm from, I ask how much time they have, because it's usually not an easy answer. So I'm going to ask you the question I hate, which is, tell me, where are you from?
Yeah, pretty simple. I mean, it's definitely a lot more simpler than yours. My parents are originally from Chihuahua, Mexico, particularly Ciudad Juárez, Arriba Juárez, you know?
Juárez.
I gotta say that, home of Juan Gabriel. So my parents just, you know, crossed the border in not the most legal of ways, and that was in the 70s, and ever since then, you know, me and 3 other brothers grew up in Texas, so that's pretty much it. My parents now live in Mexico, which is weird. So they got their citizenship and then moved back, which I don't really get that. It's almost like, it's like a badge of honor. They're like, yeah, we can, but you know, we're not gonna do it. You know, so they moved back. So I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. That's where I'm from. So it's a very traditional kind of like northern Mexico kind of upbringing. Most Mexicans that move to Texas just kind of just stay there, and that's exactly what happened to me. And then once I was old enough, I got out of Texas and moved to Los Angeles. So,
Which I think is also a path a lot of them follow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of where it happens. Like most Mexicans either move to LA or they move to Texas. So I kind of just, you know, took that into my own.
Yeah.
Into my own stride.
You're like, I could totally do this. See, I wish I could take your parents' citizenship and keep it and make it my own. Like, the times are so different. I've been here in 23 years and I don't even have a green card yet. And I'm just like, you know, I'll get there.
Yeah, my mom's very proud of it. She tells everyone, like, anytime, and it's so weird, like, if she complains about, like, she got in a fight with this guy at an oil change place, right? Because she thought he was overcharging him. I'm like, Mom, that's what oil costs. She's like, I don't need to take this. I'm an American citizen. I'm like, all right, calm down, lady. You know?
Hey, I would flex it too. When I get one, do you know the party I'm going to have? Dude, I'm going to have American flag cakes. Like, I'm not allowed to get tattoos because I'm Jewish, but like, I'm going to tattoo a flag onto my chest. And
the
next day. Like, I'm so excited to be American one day. One day. Like, when people say, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I just go, American.
Oh, I like that. That's very good. That's very beauty pageant type of response.
I've practiced, you know, my whole entire life.
You got the beauty pageant, like, sachet almost going on right there, too. I like that.
I'm a fan of the capes. We said it earlier. Not
yes, exactly.
Capes, some of them, too. But yeah, so, you know, I love talking to Mexican Americans, especially people from Mexico that grew up in a different part of the U.S., number one, and number two, whose families come from different parts in Mexico. So how do you describe the way that you grew up or your community to someone who just doesn't know about it?
Yeah, all Mexicans that grew up in or that are from Texas or northern Mexico want to be John Wayne. That's pretty much it. We all want to be cowboys. Growing up, my dad, you know, his dream was to buy a ranch in Texas, and that's exactly what he did.
Beautiful.
So we had horses. He would dress like a cowboy.
I mean, you're wearing a denim shirt.
I mean, I got the denim. I have to represent it some way. If not, I'll be disowned, you know? But yeah, I mean, that's basically it. So it's totally different than like Mexicans that grow up in Los Angeles. Like, in Texas, we're called Tejanos, right? And then in LA, they're called Chicanos.
Yeah.
And it's a totally different culture. Like, they wear Nike Cortezes, we wear Wrangler, like, yeah, we wear, we wear cowboy boots. They wear backwards caps. We wear cowboy hats. They drive lowriders. We drive lifted trucks. It's totally different, but basically that's kind of it. Like, they want to be more hip hop. We want to be more George Strait country, So it's a real kind of different type of culture, which I love, because it kind of keeps you, I guess, a little bit more grounded. And it's also it's just such a cohesive group. And, growing up, I grew up in a school that was like mostly just, white kids. So the one thing we would bond over is just like country music and stuff like that. So I still listen to country music to this day, along with, a lot of the other Mexican music that I grew up with, a lot of, Tejano, a lot of corrido, a lot of banda. So it's a different vibe. The accordion is the one thing I just hear ringing in my ear all the time.
Something crazy? Did you know that June is National Accordion Month? I'm not even making this up. June is National Accordion Month. Yeah, it's a fun fact. No, I'm not even, like, you can Google this, Everett, go home and Google this. June is National Accordion Month. Yeah, that's a fun fact. So right now we're entering the month of the accordion. So it's a good time to listen to Tejanas.
Yes, exactly.
And country music too.
No, yeah. So that's kind of like the whole vibe growing up, especially like in San Antonio. Like, the one thing I love about San Antonio is they really embrace like the Mexican culture.
Yeah. Oh,
like, it's just, there's a thing that they do once a year. It's called Fiesta Week, where it's like it's just an excuse to drink and get messed up and overeat. I know. And it's like, might as well just do it, right? Like, we're going to do it. Let's just name it something. So that's what they did.
Honestly, I embrace it too. And I actually, I love it when people like party with Mexican culture. Like, I went to Prague once and it happened to be over Cinco de Mayo. And it's Prague. Like, we're in the Czech Republic. My brother was studying abroad there, and like my mom went to visit because she missed him because she's a Arab, Mexican, Jewish mom, and she just couldn't stay away from her son for more than 3 months. So we go to visit my brother, and it's Cinco de Mayo, and we went to like this tiny Mexican restaurant in the middle of Prague, and like there's like sombreros everywhere. So like the typical things that you'd see in the U.S. for Cinco de Mayo. And we walk in, and there's like these Mexican guys, and like we're sitting there with all these American kids studying abroad in Prague, and like my mom and I started talking to the waiters who are like straight from Mexico, and we're like, whoa, how'd you end up here?
Dude, that is awesome. Like, what did they tell you?
They're like, oh, I don't know. Like, we went to Europe, and then they started in London, and they moved around, and they ended up in Prague, and they opened a Mexican restaurant, and now they're the only Mexican restaurant in the Czech Republic. So that's pretty cool. I don't know if it's the only one, but they've got their Cinco de Mayo crew.
And I like, by the way, I like that. And can we just say that? Like, I know a lot of times people like talk PC like cultural appropriation. Yeah. Mexicans are the one group that do not care.
Is it appropriation or is it appreciation?
Exactly. That's what I mean. And then it's just like, like you see people like celebrating Mexican culture. They're dancing, they're drinking. I'm like, that's what it's about. Yeah. Like, let's not put a damper on this. It's about having fun and enjoying the culture. And if it's done over a holiday that they don't really celebrate in Mexico, who cares?
I got invited to 3 different Cinco de Mayo themed Shabbat dinners here in Manhattan. And they're like, hey, come to our Cinco de Mayo Shabbat. And I was like, oh, I'm actually going to be in Mexico for that. They're like, oh, so the authentic experience. And I'm like, dinner with my grandparents. Like, we're not doing anything. It's literally just a Friday for me. But yeah. So after you finished, school in San Antonio, where'd you go? You went to LA. What?
I moved straight to LA just because I always wanted to work in the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. So when I was a kid, like, my mom put me into like theater and stuff. Which is so weird, because she's like, this short little Mexican woman from Ciudad Juarez, but in her mind, she was like, I'm going to give my kids like all of the experiences I couldn't do when I was young. So like, she would throw us into everything. She was like a very hands-on type of mom. So like, she would do like, put us in karate, play us instrument. We all had to play an instrument. We all had to do theater. And I'm the one who like really stuck with it. Like, I actually really enjoyed it. So when I moved to LA, I did the typical move. Like, oh, I'm just going to move to be an actor. Right. Mm. And it was good. I had some success early on, but I felt like I was kind of missing something. I like making people laugh, and I like to, speak my mind a lot. So I started doing stand-up comedy once I got there, and that was kind of like my life for like the next like 8 years there. So I, started performing at the clubs there, got in. I mean, it was a tough grind early on. And then I kind of found my rhythm, and then just kind of kept doing it ever since. But yeah, that was it. It was just like, how can I get into the entertainment world? Because I knew in San Antonio, I'm like, there's not going to be really much anything here, you know. It's not like nowadays where like everything is remote and, you know, you can kind of work from wherever and create stuff online. Like back then it was like Facebook had just come out, you know, so nobody was going viral back then, you know, like, so yeah, I moved to LA and man, it was like a real grind. It was real tough.
First, I want to say, I think it's a Mexican mom thing because when I first got to the U.S., my mom was like, my kids will be in everything. But mainly for her, it was cheerleading. She wanted to have a football player's son and a cheerleader daughter because that's what America was for my mom. When she thought America, she was like, cheerleader daughter, football player son. That's what America is.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. She put me in cheerleading. She put my brother in football. My brother was too fat. So they made him, they would make him basically starve himself for weigh-ins. And then like as soon as they would weigh him, he would just start stuffing his face. And I was doing my thing cheering and she made me do basketball and soccer and karate. And I was also a theater kid.
There you go.
Theater for a while. So yeah, you know, it's just one of those things, you know, we come into the land of opportunity and we take those opportunities.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And, you know, that's exactly what my mom did. And, you know, God bless her for it because it really does kind of help open up more avenues for you. Like she was very forward thinking. My dad was very like old school. He's just like, yeah, just take them to school and come back. And as long as they're fed and they're not sick, then I'm doing my job, you know. But my mom was like, no, they need to do more, you know. So that's exactly what she did. And it was good. So, yeah, when I moved to LA, I started, you know, kind of jumping in and face first. And I took a very like hands-on approach. Like when I first moved to LA, I didn't know you weren't supposed to go to like agents' offices.
Oh, I didn't know that either. Okay, cool. Good to know.
Yeah, like
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. So I remember when I first moved to LA, it was such a crash course in just life because I was 19 years old. I moved at such a young age. I didn't go to college and I was like, because I knew what I wanted to do and all my friends were going to college and they kind of were miserable because a lot of my friends were like musicians, actors, stuff like that in school. And I was like, I'm just going straight to LA. Like I'm going right into, you know, the shark's mouth, you know? So I did. And when I first got there, I didn't know so many things. And I was just like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get headshots right away. Very typical. And then I'm like, and then I'm going to take it and then go to agency offices and drop them off personally.
Wow.
And I just got this list that you could buy at a bookstore that they used to call Samuel French. It's not there anymore. It might just be an online store now, but you know, used to go there and actors used to just hang out in there and like read books and, you know, it's all plays and screenplays.
I feel like you're telling
stuff.
the story to your children.
Yeah.
We used to read books and print lists.
Yeah, exactly. So they used to sell this book called like The Agent's Book, and it's just all the agents in LA, and you would go in there, and this is before this was done online, and you would just highlight agents, and agents would post like, hey, we're looking for, you know, an older African American woman, or we're looking for young Hispanic, we're looking for, you know, seniors actors.
This is like the only industry where it's okay to write any of those things.
Yeah, it's true. It's the one group where it's the one industry that's quote unquote the most open-minded, but it's also the one that could fire you for being the wrong race.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. You know, when I grew up, I went to acting and modeling school for 2 years, and I was doing well. And you know, I'm like 14 years old, and like I'm like, how am I doing? And they're like, honestly, like great, but you'll book more if you drop to a regular weight class. And I didn't know I was plus sized, and I was like, if I what? They're like, well, you're overweight, and I was like, okay. And that's when I realized it doesn't matter how good you are at it, if you're not fitting what they're looking for, probably isn't going to work. So I didn't want to be in an industry where you could be the best at it, but still not quite get it.
Yeah, and I think it's changed now. Yeah, it's obviously it's a little sad. You know,
but that's showbiz, baby.
It's show business because at the end of the day, it's like people want to see like a heightened version on screen. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, you know, when people were getting mad at Robert Pattinson because he says he didn't want to work out for the Batman movie, and then the first people were like, "You don't take it serious," and I'm like, just let him be. He did a great job, you know, but. Yeah, it's definitely like that. And so that's exactly what I did. I found all the ones that were looking for Hispanic actors. And then I used to just go to their agents and then I would like hit the buzzer and they're like, what are you here to do? I'm like, oh, I'm an actor. I'm here to drop off my headshots. They're like, you have to mail it in. Don't come here. Ooh. And then one time I walk into this place and sure enough, I ring the doorbell and they go, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm a young actor. I just moved here from Texas. I'm here to drop off my headshot. And they were like, give me 1 minute. And I just waited there. And then all of a sudden they just buzzed me in. So I walk in and then this secretary's there and she was like, can I just tell you something? I was like, yeah. She was like, you're not supposed to do this. And I'm like, why? I mean, I wanted an agent, and I'm just here to drop it off. They're like, you're supposed to mail stuff. And then sure enough, the agent walks by and they're like, who are you here to see? And I'm like, I'm just here to drop it off. And he goes, come into my office. I have a few minutes. So I met with his agent, and he was just like this older Hispanic dude. And he was like, this is pretty ballsy. I was like, it is? I'm just dropping this off. Like, he's like, no, I appreciate that. What's your experience? So I just told him, like I did a little theater. I did like some local commercials in Texas. And then he goes, all right, I'll represent you.
Oh, wow.
That was it. It was like straight up, like, you're not supposed to do it, did it. And then that kind of clicked with something in my head. Like, you can kind of decide your own fate. And sometimes people will tell you not to do something, but I think kind of naturally kind of bending the rules, which is something I learned from my parents. Sometimes, legally you're not supposed to enter a country, but if you get in, sometimes they just let you stay, So that's what I did. Legally I'm not supposed to be here, but hey, they let me stay. So
knock on a couple of doors, drop off your headshots. They're supposed to mail them. Who uses the mail anyway? I don't know how to mail anything.
Exactly. So that was definitely my first that was my first month in LA that happened.
Wow.
So it was like a real thing. And then I remember going to my acting class, and I told the story to one of my acting, the other student there. And he was like, dude, I've been here for 3 years. I haven't been able to get an agent.
Wow.
I'm like, I don't know what you want me to say, man. I'm sorry.
I love that. Wait, so when you first came to LA and you started in the stand-up game, you got your agent, which you literally you took it. Like, you took an agent.
I mean, if he didn't sign me, I would have vandalized his card. Pretty much what happened. So
I love that. I love it for you. So when you first started doing stand-up in LA, like what was like your bit? What was your shtick?
Oh my gosh. So starting off as a stand-up comedian is probably one of the hardest things for anyone to watch. When you go to a stand-up show, I don't know if you've ever been to a stand-up show.
Many a time.
Okay, so you go, right? There's always people who are really good, and you're like, wow. And then if you see a comedian that's younger, you can almost tell within the first minute. And because a minute is an eternity on stage. So when I started off doing stand-up, I watched it a lot. I watched it a lot as a kid. I used to go back and watch like the Eddie Murphy stand-up. So like my dad had the VHS of the Eddie Murphy Raw. And he never watched it, which is weird. I'm like, why is this here? So I just watched it, and I was just laughing because he was doing these big act outs and doing the voice and the goonie goo goo. And honestly, I don't know. So it was something that just intrigued me, that this person can just, perform on stage speaking into a microphone, which I thought was insane, And then I was like, oh, that kind of planted a seed in me. So when I was in LA, I watched this documentary that Vince Vaughn produced, which is called the Vince Vaughn's Wild West Comedy Tour.
Okay.
And it's not something that was like really public. It was like this movie that came out, and then people just forgot about it. But there was like young comedians, and he took them on tour with him. And this was like the height of Vince Vaughn when, he did Wedding Crashers and all that. And they followed these comics, and I just saw like, oh, these guys, they're just, not known, but they're performing and they're killing and they're making people laugh. And it just kind of made it more accessible. It wasn't like this big superstar like Eddie Murphy. It was just regular guys doing it. So I kind of listened to what they were saying in the interviews, and one of them said something about an open mic. I was like, oh, what's an open mic? I researched it. I just went on Google, and it turns out that an open mic is something that you can just sign your name and people will put you on stage.
Like karaoke.
Yeah, like exactly like karaoke. So I found this like little pizzeria that I lived next to in LA, and this was in the Valley. It was actually in Granada Hills, and they used to do an open mic night like Thursday nights. So first time I went, I just watched. I wanted to watch everyone just to kind of see what the vibe was like, the feel of it. And then like every person who's ever done stand-up comedy, you watch like two people and you're like, I could do that, So you go, okay, you could do it, and now it's time you do it. So that's exactly what I did. I wrote some material down. I wrote some jokes. Went on stage. First time I went on stage, actually did pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
It was good. I got some laughs, and it was enough to sustain me. And I was like, did the same thing that everyone does when they go on stage for the first time. You don't act like yourself. You act like what you think a comedian would act like.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I did. I was like overly animated. I look back and I'm like, that was horrible. It's so hard to watch that. But yeah, so that's exactly what I did. And then the second time after I did that, I was like, oh, this is great. I can do it. It's easy. I'll have a stand-up comedy special on HBO in a year, And
I
then
believe it's called Max now.
Exactly, Max. Yeah, I want a special on Max. By the way, that sounds like a tampon brand.
It's
doesn't
terrible.
It? It's the
I
worst
don't like
name.
it at
I'm
all.
so glad they're getting roasted for that.
Yeah,
It's one of the
no.
worst marketing
It's
decisions.
not a good move.
Yeah, it's like, find me on Max. You're like, I'm not jumping on another social media.
Yeah.
Like, I'm already on TikTok. That's enough.
Tampons.
It's a horrible name. So the next time I did it, I went on stage again. And this time, all of the jokes that I thought were going to get a big laugh. And I went on like very confident. I was like, oh yeah, I already know what I'm going to get them with. And I'm going to open with this. And I'm going to riff on the host. And I open up by like doing a quick joke, making fun of the host of the open mic. And little did I know, like all of the comedians in the audience, because you're just performing for other comedians, which is terrible. They were all his friends.
Oh, no.
And then I was this new guy. And I'm like, hey, make fun of him. And then they're all like, nah, dude, we're not with you on that.
Oh, no.
So it just literally teetered down. And then all of my jokes bombed. And I just remember walking back to my car. And I just sat in my car. And I'm like, all right, that's stand-up comedy.
It's a learning experience.
It's learning, falling, getting up. And yeah, getting better and better each time. So that was kind of my first time starting out, and then I just kept doing it ever since. And then, within a couple of years, I was like already featuring on the road with a couple of comedians, and then, yeah, that was kind of it. It also started me to write a lot. I used to write all my own material. I still do, but it was one thing that like also showed me that I could be creative on my own. I didn't have to read a script. I can write a script,
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh, I like that. Capital W, write a script.
Yes.
So after, starting up in stand-up comedy, you get your agent in LA, and then you started working on some phenomenal projects. Do you want to walk us through what you're working on and why?
Yeah, so this was actually kind of cool because it kind of spawned from the pandemic. Like I think the pandemic was a good like reshaking of everyone who's in the creative world to like rethink certain things. And I had friends that really fell off, like it really messed with their mind. And for me, I was just like, now's the time to work on all the stuff that I've kept putting aside for a while, So it was like the Etch-a-Sketch, you just reshake it and start drawing again. And that's when I started to write out script ideas that I've had for a long time. And I took in like one screenwriting class, so I knew kind of how to actually lay it out. I read a lot of scripts, and I was like, I just want to write like a story, and I want to write stories that I would like to see on TV or like I would like to see in a movie. Stuff that was something that, came from my point of view, just like my stand-up, and the one thing that helped me with stand-up was I had a lot of comedians that I admired that were friends of mine that would kind of compliment me on my like writing and my stand-up. And they were like, hey man, you got a good, you got a good voice. Like you got that joke, the way it goes and it flows and everything. So that kind of gave me a little confidence to be able to like, let me see if I can translate this to characters and a story and a setting and, be able to bring people in. So during the pandemic, that's exactly what I did. I just like kind of got into like a fever, like of just like writing fever. Like I just would get up.
Say fever is not a good call when you're
Yeah, I know. Yeah, COVID-19.
like, oh no, you got a fever at the pandemic.
I got this fever.
You got the better of the fevers.
Yeah, exactly. It was this one. This one still hasn't been cured yet, which is good. So I just started writing, and I was getting up early, and I was writing for like 3 or 4 hours every day. And I wrote like a couple of scripts, and I would send them to friends, and friends would be like, yeah, dude, this is maybe a little rough. And it's like, that's fine. It's like not everything's going to work. So I just kept doing that. And then I finally ended up writing this like 45-page pilot that I wanted to write for a long time, which was really inspired by like my parents' upbringing. So when my parents came to the U.S., they came here as undocumented immigrants. And one of the first jobs my dad ever had was to work at a motel. And he used to tell me all these stories about working in this motel. So he worked at a motel in El Paso, Texas. in a very seedy part of town, which, is right on the border of Juarez. So you could just imagine the kind of people I would go in there.
Oh, yeah.
And he would have to rent room. Like, this was the type of motel where people rented by the hour.
Okay.
So you can just imagine
Oof.
what's there. Yeah. Yeah. He would tell me, like, there'd be hookers, there'd be pimps, there'd be drug addicts. But he was working at this motel and he was only 17 years old. Mm-hmm. So he would tell me that, he would be kind of running this motel for like this older rich white guy that hired him. And the way the guy hired him was that he just saw him walking down the street and he was just like, hey, what are you doing here? He's like, hey, if you want, I can offer you a job cleaning up and taking care of this motel.
Like White Lotus, but I guess like it's Brown Lotus.
Yeah, exactly. It's Mexican Lotus. And so my dad started telling me these stories about like how he would have to kick people out and he had to carry a gun on him. And I'm like, all of this for a 17-year-old. This sounds, it sounds really interesting.
Meanwhile, you're like doing theater and
meanwhile, I'm just like
instruments.
singing like Oklahoma on stage, right? Like, yeah. So this was like such a, different upbringing. I was like, oh, this would be such an interesting story. Like to have like the cultural context come into it. And then while, my parents were, teenagers, my dad worked there. And then they had this thing where like they ended up, legalizing a lot of undocumented immigrants through like the amnesty law that Reagan passed. So it like gave a lot of them a big opportunity to become residents, So that was one thing. I was like, oh, what if I tell this story in this setting, in this time, set in a border town with like that Tejano culture into it. And I ended up writing this pilot and I called it Legalized. Wow. Yeah. And this was 3.5 years ago at this point. And I remember I sent it to some friends and I sent it to a friend of mine who was actually a pretty accomplished TV writer. He's won a couple Emmys. And I really trusted his opinion on stuff. And I sent it to him and he just replied back. He's like, dude, this is honestly like one of the best pilots I've ever read.
Wow.
And he's like, and it's such like unique characters, circumstances, everything. He's like, you just don't see that. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm onto something, And I remember I had sent it to a couple people that were interested. I ended up sending it to some producers and stuff. And they were like, yeah, we like it. We like the story and everything. But we just don't know like how this would fit anywhere. And in my opinion, I'm like, put it on TV, like every writer is like, just put it on TV. An audience will find it. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. The way it works is they want you to kind of create stuff that people have seen already. Yeah. And that's what they ask you. What would you compare this to? What's this vibe like? And, most time like, oh, it's like, Shameless meets, Breaking Bad, or it's, like Frasier, meets, the George Lopez show. Like they want really like easy comparable stuff because marketing wise, they're like, oh, that's what we'll do. And I get it, because I've produced stuff. So it is kind of like you want that. But sometimes the audience doesn't know what they want. And then if you read how like the show Breaking Bad started, it's like, okay, so a school teacher starts selling meth, like, you know what I mean? Like there was no audience for that. And how would you compare that to anything? But they took a chance on it. Right. So in my mind, I was like, I'm going to make this whether somebody buys it or not. Like I'm going to just do everything I can to make it because I feel like it's important. And I shopped it around for about a year, got some interest in it. Got some offers, but it was like very small. And I'm like, and also they don't guarantee that they make it. Sometimes they'll just buy a script off of you and then they'll never make it. Yeah. And I'm like, that would devastate me if somebody bought it and they never made it, So after a while, I was like, you know what? I want to make this and I'm going to figure out a way to make it. And sure enough, that's exactly what I started to do. And I took the original script and condensed it down into a shorter story. And last year in August, we entered pre-production for it. Amazing. And we ended up getting money for it. And we ended up getting an amazing cast for it. And then in December, we actually shot it in El Paso, Texas. Wow. This past year. So right now we're currently in post-production for it. And it's going to be coming out. It'll be done by June, the end of June. So in a couple weeks. And it's literally, 3.5 years worth of work to get it to where it is now. So it's called Legalized. We got some amazing actors in it. We got Manny Rubio, who was in Stranger Things. He's actually from El Paso, native. So I wanted to get like real actors that are from it. We got Richard Villa in it, who's an amazing comedian from Mexico. And we got an amazing actress. Her name's Jackie Guillen. She was in Orange is the New Black and everything. And she's Mexican-American from a border town. So I wanted to get real authentic cast members to tell this story. And I'm really happy with where it's coming together. And it's, we're hoping to premiere it at South by Southwest about next year.
That's number one. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Number two, what a great story. And it's a story that needs to be told. Number three, where can people find it?
So right now, it's currently not released yet.
No, I know right now it's not released.
Yeah.
But after the South by Southwest event, where can I watch this?
So once we produce...
We shall see.
Yes. Once we produce it and everything, we are definitely going to find a solid distributor for it. And once we'll do that, I'll announce it. But you guys can follow everything, and you guys can do it all through my Instagram. Which is at BTD Jokes, and I also have an official Instagram for the film. So just follow that, and we'll put the plugs in later. But yeah, this story is something that it was really hard to do, but we ended up doing it, and we actually shot, and it was so cool because I got my grandfather, who on my mom's side, to be in the film. I gave him like a little cameo. He's 92 years old, this old Mexicano, from Juarez, and we actually shot in this old park of El Paso called Alameda, which is just like historic. It's just old. It's been there since like the 1800s. And we actually ended up filming at this old motel that's been there since like the 40s, which was great. It's beautiful. It's called the Del Norte Inn. We really want to thank the owner because he was so awesome with us shooting there, and he was so cool. He even gave us a bottle of tequila, which is so cool.
That's also like the best gift.
Yeah, very Mexican, which is good. Hey, man, thanks for shooting your film here. Here's a bottle of tequila. I'm like, fuck, dude, I'll shoot here more often. Why not,
I'll shoot there.
Yeah, and then exactly. We'll do the podcast from there next time.
WTF opens a location.
And then we actually shot at this old diner called Jaime's Hut, which is a very legendary spot in El Paso. And my grandfather, when he was there, he was like, "Oh, I've been to this diner before." Wow. And when we shot at the motel, he's like, I remember staying there when I first came to the U.S. I had to spend a night somewhere, and I spent the night at that motel. So it was like it all was kind of coming together.
Yeah.
And there was such a my whole family was kind of tied to this place. El Paso is like very near and dear to my heart. A lot of, that's where my parents first got their start, and that's where a lot of my family still lives there. And it was so cool just to kind of like actually film something and kind of bring a story to life that's centered around this town.
Plus, I think that's also the moment like that your family, who took a very big risk in coming to the U.S., like telling the story is giving them credence, giving them this weight.
Oh yeah.
But also, everything paid off. Like all those opportunities, all those, theater and instrument and, all of that makes sense now. And having your grandpa at that diner and having him in the movie too. I don't know, honestly, or I guess like it's a film we're calling it.
Yeah.
Film.
It's a film. It's a film.
Film.
Yeah.
Okay. Film. I feel so con when I say film, but no, I really it brings everything together. So I'm very proud of you. We're going to plug all of that as soon as it comes out too. We'll make sure to promote it across all of the Americanish socials. So make sure that you're following Bryan. Make sure that you're following his new film. Make sure that you're also following Americanish. So we're going to get all of that in there, and I'm going to do a little bit of a shift because I introduced you as a Mexican-American writer, director, comedian, right? But what I didn't tell people, and what we get to talk about now, is that you're married to an Ashkenaz Jew. So you're Jewish adjacent.
I'm very much within the blue circle as well. What
So how did that happen? And like this wonderful, amazing story, Legalized, all of these like stories of a Mexican-American family. I love that. And then you marry an Ashkenazi Jew. So how did that happen?
Well, it's the American dream, and I wanted to move into business class, so that's the upgrade. My wife is Jewish. She's Ashkenazi Jewish, which was it's a culture that I really had no real connection to prior to meeting her. So it was a very just out of the blue chance that we ended up meeting. It was literally the most out of whack place because we ended up meeting on Tinder.
Oh, look at that.
Exactly.
A great unifier.
Yes. And this is like Tinder going back to like 2013, 14, you know? So this was like before like Hinge and like all this was like the original, right? It was the genesis of a lot of online misery for people. I found happiness, but you know, most people are miserable. So it was great. My wife, we just met on Tinder. We ended up kind of just having an amazing first date. We, you know, kept seeing each other. And, you know, she told me, she was like, you know, you're Jewish, or she's Jewish, you know, and I'm Christian. And it was just this weird kind of connection that, you know, we just had. And I started learning more about the culture, and she started getting more into it, you know. And it's one of those things that I've learned is that certain Jewish Americans, like a lot of times in their early 20s, they kind of pretend like it's not really, they kind of pretend like it's not a big part of their culture. And, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, that's what I'm born into Judaism.
I'm culturally Jewish.
Exactly.
Jewish.
Exactly. But then as we started, you know, getting married and getting old, all of a sudden I just see her like embracing it more and really kind of taking the steps to like really make it part of her day-to-day life. And I was with her every step of the way. Like I thought it was amazing. And just kind of partaking in my first, you know, Hanukkah, partaking in my first Shabbat, and, you know, going to temple with her, going to the synagogue. And it was such a cool experience just to go, and then everybody being like very welcoming. And, you know, when we moved to New York together, that was the big thing. She's like, you know, we got to find the right synagogue and everything. So, you know, we kept going to different ones, you know, on Friday nights, and then we ended up finding one in Park Slope, and it was so welcoming. I just remember going there and really kind of just seeing like people unify together. And the one thing I love about Jewish culture, it has a lot of parallels with like Mexican culture, actually.
A lot.
So one thing that Jews do that I didn't really realize till, you know, after I met my wife, is that they really kind of embrace mortality. A lot.
Oh, I mean, I embrace mortality, but explain it to me. I want to hear from your point of view.
Well, like in Mexican culture, we talk about death a lot. And we don't talk about death as like a terrible thing. We talk about it as just part of life. And in fact, that's why we celebrate it. You know, Dia de los Muertos. We always talk about our relatives. Every Mexican household has photos of their relatives that are passed away. And you speak to them, you speak about them like they're still here. And it's kind of like that respect because, you know, in our minds, they are still here. And in Jewish culture, when I've gone there, is every Shabbat service is they mention people who have passed, you know, like, has anyone lost anyone? And then people kind of just say it out loud in a room full of people. Like, you're talking about people, you know, I've seen grown men break down and be like, I just lost my wife this week. And everyone kind of is there in that moment and they just embrace it. And it's like, wow, like this is probably the first time this guy's probably said that out loud, and he said it in a room full of people that are just there to love him and support him. And that's really where it connected me. I'm like, because that's what we do in Latin culture. You know, one of my cousins, you know, she unfortunately passed away, you know, very young. She was 32. And I just remember going to the funeral. It was such a gut-wrenching funeral because it's somebody so young and it was so tragic and it came out of nowhere. But I just remember, like, we're in the funeral, we're in Juarez, and then within 5 minutes of the burial, we're all cracking jokes and laughing together. And it's all in fun and it's positive, and it's like that's kind of that grieving as a group. And then that's one thing I've learned that, you know, in Jewish culture, they do that as well.
And it's funny you mention that because we have, you know, the idea in Mexican culture for like ofrendas, like the so we don't do that because we're Jewish, but what we do is every Friday night we light Shabbat candles. And what my grandmother on my mom's side does is she lights one for every person that has passed. And we say Leilu Nishmat, which means like may your soul go upwards. So every Friday she's lighting on their behalf, lighting one candle for each. So when she lights, there's like 16 candles. I can show you a picture of 20 candles. It depends on the week for her. But it's one of those things that when I think of ofrendas, it's such like a foreign concept to me, but it's really not. You know, lighting candles to honor the dead. My grandma does that every week. Right. So it's funny how, you know, there's certain things that, we do have in common in those things. And I never thought about the mortality side of it. But
that was one thing where I was like, you grieve as a group.
Yeah, we do. We have a whole shiva.
Exactly.
There's a movie you should see, by the way. I'm going to put a plug. I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's essentially about a Jewish Mexican shiva. And like there are Jews living in Polanco, and like there's like the cousin that married the non-Jew and the cousin that got super religious and moved to Israel. And like suddenly everyone's back together, and like all these funny things start going down. It's a great comedy. We watched it during COVID for some reason. I don't know why we watched it during COVID.
That's a good time.
Because we were just preparing, you know.
Is this a Mexican production?
It's a Mexican production. It's older. I think it came out in like the early 2000s. There was actually just a Mexican Jewish film festival here in New York at the Tribeca Synagogue, and it's one of the shows that they showed it opening night. I had already seen it with my family, but it was just one of those things that really just shows you Jewish Mexican culture. It's like this Ashkenazi Jewish family that grew up in Mexico, and they're having this shiva, and it turns out like the ex-husband had an affair with this like Jewish, non-Jewish Mexican actress, and she ends up coming to the shiva, and everyone's at the shiva, and it's just like this crazy, and then one of them gets like arrested for tax fraud. Like there's just a lot of things going on,
Pretty
and you're just sitting there and you're like, oh, like that's my uncle. Yeah. This is exactly what my family shiva is like, you know? So it's interesting. And that actually takes us to the Spill the Tea segment of this show.
Yes.
So Spill the Tea segment. My favorite thing to talk about is superstitions. I love superstitions. Because I feel like they really show you what the culture has its mind on all the time. So I was telling you earlier, I'm wearing this blue thing on my necklace, which I have no idea where it came from, but it's a superstition against the evil eye. So now the Jewish culture has this evil eye idea, right? That like everyone's putting the evil eye on you. And you hear that from like also in Mexican culture, sometimes te ponen el ojo, like you hear it, but I never understood the blue rock situation. And then it turns out that I'm pretty sure this is a Middle East thing. Because I always try to tease out, is this a Jewish thing? Is this a Mexican thing? Is this a Middle Eastern thing? Because I'm all those things. Pretty sure it's a Middle Eastern thing. So most of the superstitions around my family revolve around the evil eye and marriage. And that's what's on the mind of my culture. But what is your favorite superstition?
So one thing that my mom would always talk about, right? And this is the one thing, like, I don't know if this is all Mexican mothers. I think it is because they're all a little crazy. But my mom used to do this superstition where she told us if we don't behave or if after she passes, she will come back, and she used to say in Spanish, "Te voy a jalar los pies."
Oh.
When you sleep. So it's like this threatening beyond the grave, which I'm like, that's the best superstition because think about it. Like if my mom dies, right, she can know the wonders of the world. She can explore the universe. She can see why we're here, why humanity's here. But she's going to say, F all that. I'm going to go and torture my sons if they don't behave, which I think is hilarious.
I love that. That's also the most Mexican mom thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, te voy a jalar los pies cuando estoy muerto.
And you know why it also works? Because the thing is that it doesn't like come true. Like the threat doesn't actually, vest until after her death, which means that her whole entire life you have to behave.
Exactly.
Like all of it. Like it just like it covers it. It's not like, I'm going to do X, Y, Z that at some point as an adult you'll feel. No. This is like until her last day, you're living under threat.
And she's making a promise that like, it's like a villain, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I will still see you in the afterlife, you know? Like that's what so she'd be like, te voy a jalar los pies cuando estás dormido. Meaning like, if you're sleeping comfortably and you feel something tugging you, that's going to be my mom coming to torture me.
You're going to have to wake up and be like, oh fuck. Like,
so that was like a
together.
constant threat. And that's one of my favorite things. It's always stuck with me. And it's so funny because my mom would just throw out these veiled threats because, she raised 4 boys. Yeah. So it's like, what is she going to be on top of all of them? Like, it's tough. So she had to really like stigmatize certain things. So much so that my brother told me the other day that, he was like doing this thing and he heard my mom yell at him, and he would like turn around. It's like she wasn't even there.
Wow.
So it's like she has... It's like the multiverse of madness, but with a Mexican mom.
I want to achieve that level. I don't have kids yet, but I'm going to get there. Your mom and I are going to have a talk. I'm going to be like, so how do you instill the fear?
Oh yeah, no, she's very good at it. Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, when my mom passes, I'll be very sad, but I know she'll at least be able to haunt me, which is nice.
Oh, you see, like we said, like it's like they're still there.
Exactly, it's like they're still there.
So from superstition we move to happy. So what is your favorite holiday or tradition?
Okay, so I've really thought about this, right? Because one thing is, with Jewish culture, you get to embrace a lot of the holidays and stuff on that side. But with the Mexican culture, it's like we have stuff that are just more traditions and they're kind of unnamed holidays. So one of my favorite things, especially growing up as a Tejano Mexicano, is something they call la carne asada, right? Which, that's I'm vegan, so for me to
Oh,
say
no.
that, yeah, it's more about
I
I
was so excited.
I don't eat the meat. You know, I'll do the chips and guac and all that. You know, guacamole. I already know Mexicans already yelling at me. Why would you say guac? You know, but screw you. You know. So yeah, but what I love about it is that everyone just sets a day aside to basically get the family together, get all the neighbors together. Everyone is just there just to have a good time. It's not about a birthday. It's not about a celebration. It's literally just an entire event for all of us just to forget about our BS. You'll bring up the BS after a few, you know, tequilas and stuff, but it's okay because we're all in it together, right? And it goes from sun up all the way to sundown till the next morning.
Yep.
And that's the one thing I love is that when Mexicans party, it's going to be a 24-hour event. I mean,
Yep.
it's an all-day thing. Like, you can't just go in, hang out for an hour, and then be like, oh, I got another thing. No, you're there. And you get yelled at. You get chastised. They're like, ya se va Juan, dile que, you know? And people will literally like just be like, you can't leave.
Yeah.
And that's why I leave. It's like you're forced to just sit there and enjoy the time, which, you know, my wife, you know, she's, you know, comes from an American Jewish family. So they lean a lot into the Americanism stuff. And that's the one thing. It's like, I remember I went to a party at her father's house, and it's 11 o'clock at night and people are packing up ready to go. And I'm like, what was going on? We just started.
Yeah. So it's funny you bring this up because number one, my Shabbat dinner's at my house and usually at 2 a.m. Like usually we sit down for Shabbat dinner at 8 p.m. Like I used to have a boyfriend that wasn't really a Shabbat dude, and you know, he'd be in New York and I'd be like, oh, like we're sitting down for dinner, talk to you later. And then I wouldn't text him until 2 a.m. and he's like, hey, like what happened? And I was like, no, like we had dinner, like that's what happened. And then my brother just got married a couple of weeks ago, and I had to explain to the Americans that were flying into Mexico, like I had to really prep them for this. For months we were prepping them. We're like, understand the wedding ends at breakfast. Understand the wedding ends at breakfast. It's such a shame that here in the U.S. you spend hundreds of, I don't even know how much money, I haven't gotten married, so thank God. I don't know how much money people
tens
spend.
of thousands of dollars.
Tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding. That's going to start at like what, 7 p.m., 6 p.m., and then it's going to end at 11:30. They're going to be sleeping. At 11:30, midnight, they're sleeping because the venue ends. That's it. It's midnight. And it's a shame how much money you spend for such an important night where people are like, oh, yeah, I have a wedding or I have this event, I have that event, and then they're just with you for 3-4 hours. No. In Mexico, like we go all night. Like you come to the wedding and we do the chuppah because we're Jewish, right? So we do the chuppah. And then afterwards we have like the reception and all these things, but you're not leaving until breakfast. And the Americans actually stayed. Like they killed it. Like they're like, oh, chilaquiles. And we're like, yes, welcome to my culture. There you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree with you. The carne asada, like that's the mentality. It's going to end the next day.
And that's what creates the warmness in Mexico. And that's one thing. My wife, she loves Mexico now. Like she wants us to buy a house in Mexico. I love Mexico because everyone you go, as soon as you land there, you feel the temperature of the country. Like everybody's just so much warmer.
It's like that filter they show.
Yes. Yeah, no, but it's like everyone, like you can, you get into your taxi and the cab drivers telling you jokes right away. And it's like, hey, hermano, even though our language is very loving. Hermano, ¿cómo estás? Blah, blah, blah. Like, sí, ahí nos vemos, que tenga buen día. Like, have a blessed day. Like, that's normal speak. You know, whereas over here it's like, hello, hi, you know, take care.
Adela, Uber.
Exactly. Yeah. You get into your Uber, no one says it. They don't say, hey, how's your day going? Blah, blah, blah. Like, and it's just, you know, the American culture. And that's one thing my parents always instilled in me is like, I want you guys to live in the United States, but think and feel and treat everyone like a Mexican.
Yeah. Well, I guess it makes sense why you guys went to Texas too, because there you go, Southern hospitality.
Yes.
It's
yeah, very much so.
It might not be as warm as Mexico when it comes to that, but at least it's not New York or LA.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, in Texas too, it's a lot of that, you know, people drive by each other. They wave at each other. Your neighbors come out, you wave at them. Here, it's like, you know, if somebody waves at you and you're like, whoa, what's your problem, man? You got eye problems? You know, like.
Yeah, or like you keep your head down because you're a girl in New York and you're not supposed to make eye contact.
That is true, yeah, too. Yeah, this only works if you're a guy, by the way.
Yeah, no, girls, if
you're a girl and you're saying hi to everyone, that's not going to end well, so.
So the last thing I want to ask you is, you know, what is a word or phrase that doesn't quite have an English equivalent?
Oh, my God. So one of my favorite ones, and this is something that my dad used to yell at me all the time, is ponte las pilas.
Ponte las pilas. Oh, I was just talking about this. Yes.
Yeah, that's one thing that I just remember as a kid, and it doesn't translate well to English at all, which means put your batteries on.
Put your batteries on.
Basically,
Ponte las pilas.
Uh-huh. Which in Spanish, it's very clear cut. Like, ponte las pilas means like, get your shit together, right? But it's done in such a more like nuanced way. And I love that the fact that like pilas is just literally like if you're a toy and just throw, you've dropped your batteries and you put them back in. So that to me just doesn't have an English equivalent. Like, you can't tell someone, hey man, put your batteries on. People are like, what are you talking about, dude? What is this?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was just talking about that with someone. I was like, yeah, like you just like, gotta get on it. Like, when you're on mode, I just kept saying, when you're on mode, and they're like, yeah, I know on mode. I'm like, yeah. Ponte las pilas. Like, that's on mode. But in English, you have to say, like when you're on mode, instead of just saying ponte las pilas. So I agree. That's a great one. I forgot it existed. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yes.
And there you go. Bryan Torresdey, thank you for joining us on Hyphenated. And thank you for ponerte las pilas, getting us legalized. And everyone check out his new film.
Thank you so much.